Now tonight sees the world premiere of Snowden, the latest political thriller from the director Oliver Stone. The film follows the life of Edward Snowden, the man responsible for the biggest leak of top secret intelligence information that the world has ever seen. Well, in real life, Sarah Harrison from Wikileaks played an important part in the story, helping Edward Snowden escape to Russia and then spending 6 weeks alongside him in Moscow airport. Well, she's been living in Germany for the last 2 years, but has now returned to the UK after her lawyers said she is no longer at risk of being detained under terror laws. Well, in a few minutes, we'll speak to her in what is her first British TV interview. But first, here's Jim Reid.
June 2013, and this man was on the front pages all over the world.
Edward Snowden, who leaked secrets about our government's surveillance programs, is officially a fugitive.
Edward Snowden has been working for both the CIA and America's National Security Agency. He'd flown to Hong Kong, taking thousands of top-secret documents with him, files which he said showed the true extent of US electronic surveillance programs.
When you are subverting the power of government, that's a fundamentally dangerous thing to democracy.
Sarah Harrison had been working for the whistleblowing site Wikileaks. She was told to take the next plane to Hong Kong and help with the Snowden case. The US authorities had charged him with spying and wanted him back. Harrison was by his side when he flew to Moscow, hoping to catch a connecting flight to South America. For the next 6 weeks, they were stuck together in the transit zone of Moscow airports, unable to leave after the US cancelled Edward Snowden's passport. But while the American became a well-known face all over the world, Harrison continued to work in the background. Snowden was eventually given temporary asylum in Russia. Harrison stayed with him for the next 3 months as he met with politicians and journalists. In late 2013, she moved to Berlin, saying her lawyers had told her not to come back to the UK in case she was detained under terror laws. She continued her work with Wikileaks. The site's controversial founder, Julian Assange, has been living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 4 years now. Swedish police still want to question him over allegations of sex abuse and rape, which he denies. His supporters fear he could be sent on to the US and put on trial for releasing secret documents. Sarah Harrison is said to be his closest advisor, someone he speaks to almost every day. Wikileaks is still showing itself to be influential.
Everybody now, settle down.
Over the summer, it published internal emails, which led to the resignation of a senior US politician.
This is like Watergate, only now in cyber time.
The site is now promising more significant leaks linked to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, all to be released in the run-up to the US election.
Well, Sarah Harrison is here with me now for her first British TV interview. Thank you for coming in. So tell me, first of all, how it came about that you helped Edward Snowden.
When he went public as being the source of these revelations, the stories had started some days before coming out and really shook the world. And he then came forward as the source with a video shot by Laura Poitras. And then obviously the manhunt began. The intelligence services of at least the United States were very much after him. The government was reacting very strongly to the revelations coming out and attacking him and those working with him. And he actually reached out to WikiLeaks, understanding that we knew quite a lot about, because of Julian's case, to do with asylum, extradition, and also where politics comes into these cases. You'll see in a number of the situations with whistleblowers these days is that politics and law intersect in them. It isn't just about the law, there is politics coming into it. And for example, in Ed's case, a president's plane was downed due to it. So we had good expertise in this area, as well as a knowledge of technical and operational security. So he asked us for any assistance we could give. We were able to help. I know Hong Kong very well, and so I was chosen to actually go out there and work on the ground.
And you were in Moscow airport for what, 5 weeks?
5 weeks, yeah. So I began in Hong Kong, sort of sorting out what the actual legal and political scenario was, ensuring that he would be able to leave at the time that we did in a completely legal and safe manner. The United States had actually, although they had issued an extradition request, they'd messed up the middle name, his middle name. So, of course, the Hong Kong authorities were being very diligent, wanted to make sure they had the right person, etc. And so were unable to do anything with the initial paperwork that was sent. Luckily, we timed our exit from Hong Kong quite well, and we left before the United States were able to put in even the right paperwork.
But he was stranded in Moscow because the passport was withdrawn.
Exactly. So we were then on the flight, and Hong Kong were, I think, understandably quite keen to explain that this was not their problem now, and it actually was leaked that he had left Hong Kong jurisdiction and was on a flight out on the way to Russia, and that I was with him. Once we hit the ground in Russia and tried to check in for our onward flight, we were actually aiming to get to Latin America, which was where he had wanted to claim asylum. In an incredible own goal, the United States actually cancelled his passport, leaving him stranded there. And so we ended up, for 40 days and 40 nights in Moscow airport.
You say in a Moscow airport, but the world's media had descended and no one could find you. So where actually were you?
Well, we luckily both quite good at hiding. So, the world's press were around, and of course intelligence services after him as well. But we managed to find a safe space within that airport, and of course, therefore, couldn't, because of all of these people looking for us, couldn't leave that much. So we basically spent sort of 40 days in that room.
Did you move around? Did you go out and get food from the airport? How did you survive?
people have to eat, and there is airport food, but a lot of Burger Kings. I haven't eaten one since, and I don't know if I ever will.
So you were stuck in Russia at this point, and of course Edward Snowden is an enemy of the US, therefore a natural friend of Russia at this point. What were the conversations that you had about granting asylum for Edward Snowden there?
Well, he had wanted to get to Latin America, so began by actually putting in asylum requests to several other countries, many in Latin America, but also Europe, to see if there would be a safe place somewhere that he could go that wasn't Russia. And we put in over 20, actually. This is what we spent quite a number of weeks right at the beginning when we were there doing. And sadly, most countries in Europe either, they rejected, or some just didn't even answer at all, didn't respond. There were a number of favourable answers from places in Latin America, but of course getting there from Russia by this stage, where we would need safe passage, particularly after a president's plane was downed, where Europe, many countries in Europe closed their airspace and helped down this president's plane. It was clearly unsafe, and he would not be able to get safe passage to go there.
So did the Russian authorities want anything in exchange for asylum? Because this is wonderful for the Russian authorities. They've got somebody who is exposing state secrets for the US, walking into their country and effectively unable to leave. So did the FSB get in touch? Did the Russian authorities say, yes, you can stay, but we want access to your information?
There was never anything asked for in exchange. He was approached in the airport by intelligence services. It would be unimaginable to think that they didn't. That is their job. That's what any country's intelligence services would have done. It was one of the reasons why I stayed with him. There were multiple to ensure his safety in various ways, but one, we were aware and predicted that this attack would come, that he had given information to other governments, and of course including the Russians. So we wanted another witness to be able to say, which I can testify to, that he didn't give anything to any intelligence services. There was never any talk about it being in exchange for anything at all. And then later on, when we put in the asylum request, all the proper processes were gone through. He then had to fill out asylum form, etc., and got his temporary asylum into Russia for a year after some deliberation time from them.
Now, he's got about a year left on that residence permit.
Yeah, first he got asylum in Russia for temporary asylum for a year, and then applied for a short-term residency permit, so for 3 years. And so, he's, as you say, it's a year left on that.
And will the Russians then ask for access to information in order for him to stay? Presumably that's a concern.
Whether they will ask or not, I don't know. He's been quite clear, and I think that by now, after so many years, it has been borne out that he did give all the information to journalists in Hong Kong at the beginning. He didn't leave Hong Kong with any information, so whatever anybody was wanting, he wouldn't be able to give it. I think that this has now been quite clear for several years, so I'd be surprised if they go through any trouble to that again.
Did you ever at any point question your own choices, your own decisions about going with Edward Snowden? Because he didn't know all of the contents of those 20,000 emails that he had, and I'm assuming you didn't read 20,000 documents, so you didn't even know what he was leaking.
Well, the revelations had started to come out. I hadn't read all of them myself, of course, but it was Ed and journalists Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, who had been working with, and Ewan McCaskill from here in the UK, that he had been working with in Hong Kong. They are doing a process of reading the documents before they publish. Edward Snowden worked very closely with these types of documents and had clearly been through them quite carefully. So I think that any of these sorts of attacks to say he didn't really understand the documents or he didn't know, he was unaware, they're all trying to feed into a spin by the US government.
But you didn't know, did you? You didn't know what was in those documents. And was there ever a moment when you questioned yourself and said, well, could there be information that risks people's lives, that risks the security of people here in Britain?
From the previous work that I'd done over several years with Wikileaks, we'd very much understood that true factual information about what a government is doing in illegal processes doesn't ever harm any member of the public, and is actually only helps members of the public and starts to bring governments to account. So that was from seeing the quality of the material that had started to come out and the type of information and the type of illegal behaviour that he was revealing, that was never a concern in my head.
Let's talk a little bit about Julian Assange. You obviously work closely with him at WikiLeaks, now in the Ecuadorian embassy here in London, has been for 4 years. What is the state of his health and also his mental health living there for so long?
Well, it's been great for me to see him for so many years. I mean, obviously we were staying in contact over the period I was living in Berlin quite closely, because working together on a daily basis. And I think it really is the work that keeps him going. He believes in it very strongly. We're seeing great effects from the work that we're doing, and that really does keep him strong. But of course, staying in that sort of environment, I mean, he's in one room in a very small embassy in central London. He hasn't had sun for 4 years. There was also something I noticed when I was in the airport, just for 40 days, which may seem a long period of time, but compared to 4 years is really minuscule. And that is that actually once I stepped outside, I realised my eyes hurt quite a lot for several days. And what I realised was that it was because I hadn't seen anything other than just the wall quite close to me for that period of time. And my eyes had adjusted to not actually be using those muscles. They hadn't had any practice of seeing any further, and just 40 days hurt my eyes. So the harm after 4 years to his physical person of being in this state, that actually prisoners, we give them better quality of life.
But he's not a prisoner. At any moment he can walk out of those doors and he could be extradited to Sweden to face those charges of sexual abuse and rape. Why doesn't he do that?
He has actually his treatment has actually been officially declared by the United Nations as detention, as arbitrary detention, no less. And the reason
that's something that the British government doesn't recognise, that UN ruling.
The British government are not complying with the UN ruling. That is correct, but that doesn't mean that the United Nations are wrong. The way that the concept of detention in this way works in law is that if someone would have to give up human rights to leave the place in which they're in, then that does count as enforced detention.
But why doesn't he go? Because many people watching this will say, well, if he's innocent, as he says he is, why not go and face the legal process? Then he can get on with his life.
It would be great if he was able to clear his name and to finally give his side of this story. He's been asked to be questioned by the Swedes for many years. He has not gone to Sweden due to lack of assurances that he would not be extradited to the United States. It's important to remember that there is a large secret grand jury going on in the US. Although it is secret, many documents are coming out continuously, many this year, and the trial of Chelsea Manning was a large mechanism in which a number of these documents came out that show and prove the threats against him. There are politicians that are asking for him to be illegally droned. So his asylum is actually against the threats from the United States, and he's asked for assurances he would not be extradited on, and those assurances are not being given. And until that point where he can feel safe that he is not at risk of being sent to the United States, where he would most certainly get tortured, then he must keep his asylum. And anybody trying to put pressure to take away his right to asylum is colluding in this arbitrary detention.
I'm sure President Obama would say that he wouldn't be tortured if he was extradited to the US, but would face a fair trial. But let's talk a little bit about you, because when you left Russia, when you were with Edward Snowden, you went and lived in Berlin for fear of returning to the UK, but clearly you're here now.
Yeah.
So what changed?
Well, in great news earlier this year, David Miranda, who had been doing journalistic work to do with the Snowden documents and was transiting on behalf of The Guardian through the UK with a number of Snowden documents, was stopped under the Terrorism Act. And there's an interesting part of the Terrorism Act in the United Kingdom which is called Schedule 7. And that is that at borders, ports of entry, so airports, people can be stopped under this Schedule 7, and at that you have things that we would all consider normal rights. There is no right to silence when you are stopped under Schedule 7. You're forced to answer every question. So David Miranda, when he was stopped, was forced to give up passwords, etc., all to do with his work, his journalistic work on this material.
And you want to make sure that didn't happen.
And my lawyer's assessment at the time was that there was a very high risk, because of my work with Edward Snowden and with Wikileaks, that this law would be used with me. We were certain I would be asked questions that I would ethically not want to answer, and the problem then is you can be charged as a terrorist, which has obviously many large implications after that.
But that didn't happen.
Well, David Miranda took a case saying that journalists should not be treated as terrorists in this country, that this violated other rights and press freedoms. And although initially lost, took a High Court appeal, which he won earlier this year. And this meant that journalists were then ring-fenced from this being used against them. I'm a journalist here, I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists, and so the risk was therefore deemed much lower and I would be protected. And I came in and that was great for me this summer.
And for you, I mean, your life has changed so much over the last few years. Do you ever look back and think, I wish I'd changed my decisions at any time? I mean, what is your life like now? Have you got the same friends? Are you still in contact with people?
Yeah, I'm in contact with many of my friends. They've had to learn how to encrypt their communications. Things have got busier as I've learned more. I mean, after helping Edward Snowden, we actually realised that there were very few people actually able to help in these sorts of scenarios. We actually therefore set up a whole other organisation to protect whistleblowers, Courage, which I am now director of as well. So the work's just got more. The cases I'm involved in have just got more. We now have 7 beneficiaries of this. One, Larry Love, who I believe was on this show earlier, has an extradition case going on at the moment. So things have just gotten busier and in some ways riskier, but also more interesting. And I just see more things to fight for on a daily basis. It keeps me going each day when I get up in the morning.
But you're saying you've only just recently got a mobile phone?
I've only just recently got a mobile phone, yes. There were many years without it, and yes, many people can not understand that. And I still don't have Facebook or Twitter, which is shock horror to many.
Some people may find that liberating. Sarah Harrison, thank you for coming in and speaking to us.